Hey guys, welcome back to the Smash Property Podcast. I'm Nick V, and today's episode is a very special episode. We decided to map out how you can generate $100,000 in net passive income as of 2025. We factored in things like inflation. We factored in things like interest rates staying at 6.5%. We factored in a whole bunch of things that make this so realistic, it is ridiculous. So, strap yourselves in, grab a cup of coffee, grab a notebook, because there's going to be tons of value in this episode. I hope you enjoy. Let's get into it. Okay, so thanks for joining this $100,000 passive income blueprint strategy that I'm going to walk you through in just a second time. But before we do that, I need to get a couple things out of the way first, because this strategy that we're going to go through is not for everyone. Now, there is lots of different ways that you can make money in real estate. This is just one of those many different ways. So that I don't waste your time, this strategy is not for people who want to get rich quick. All right, this strategy takes time. All right, if you're a very high risk taker, this is not the strategy for you, because there are other ways, if you've got a very high risk tolerance, that you can probably make this money much quicker than what we are about to go through. If you want positive cash flow from day one, this is definitely not the strategy for you. And if you want the easy road, okay, you don't like making hard decisions in life, this is definitely not for you either. Now, importantly, in today's day and age, more than ever, borrowing capacity is going to be an issue. So if you yourself don't earn more than $150,000 a year, or you and your partner combined don't earn 150K in a year, this is not going to work, because you're going to run into serviceability issues. So for example, if you and your partner earn 80K and another partner earns 80K, you've got a combined income of 160. This can definitely work. So borrowing capacity is something that we have factored in. Now, I will go and say that in terms of the structure that you're going to use to buy this, whether it's company, trust, personal name, I will leave that for a discussion between you and your accountant, because everyone's circumstance is going to be slightly different. Who this is for? People that have a low risk appetite, all right? Now, obviously, there's no way to eliminate all risk here, but the strategy that we have built is a very conservative, low risk way of you getting to $100,000 net passive income. It just takes time, okay? It is for people who understand leverage, all right? We are going to use debt to further advance our position in terms of building our net worth and also building our net passive income. This is for people who want to use proven strategies that other people like myself and many people before me have used to make this work. All right, this is also for people that understanding that sacrificing a little bit in the now to have much more later down the line. And this is also for people that have $100,000 plus in savings, or the equivalent amount in equity, whether that's built up into your principal place of residence or an existing property portfolio. Now, with this equity component, your specific borrowing capacity will need to be factored in here, because we are going off the assumption that you are using savings to build out this property portfolio. If you're using equity, it is still 100% doable. You just have to factor in your specific borrowing capacity as we move through. Okay, so let's get into the actual strategy that we're going to go through. So we're starting in year one of our property investing journey. Now, the main goal here is to find a house on a big block of land. All right, this numbers that we're going to run through, this is actually a real example of a property that we purchased in the last couple of weeks for a client. This is important because this is going to set us up for the rest of our property investing journey. So this is what I like to call the foundation of our property portfolio. And we're not just going to go buy any old house on any old big block of land. There has to be specific criteria that we need to use in order to set us up for success as we move through. What is that criteria? Number one, we need to find a house that is undervalued. Now, you might hear out there a lot these days where people like to, they say buy below market value. Technically, it's incorrect, because market value is whatever you pay for the property. Accurately, it's probably more considered buying below comparable sale value in the area. So, for example, this property, which is again a real property we bought for $460,000, okay? The property is actually bank valued at $480,000. So this property, you're actually making money just by buying the property itself. Critical component, and I'll explain why as we move through. So we want an undervalued property, okay? That's what that means. Of course, we need the property to grow in value over time, all right? So we need to make sure that the property is in a high growth area. Now, specifically what I mean is we need this property to be growing at least 6% per annum, okay? Now you might be asking there and going, well, how do I know that a property is going to grow in value 6% per annum? Well, for starters, no one knows, all right? We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow is definitely not promised. But what we do in real estate is we look at historical information to give us an indication of what may happen in the future. So if you're out there looking, you would want to be looking at data that covers a couple of decades, so 10, 20, 30 years worth of data. And if that data is telling you that over a 30-year period, this particular area has grown on average 6% per annum, you've got a good area that you would be looking to invest in. Now, the yield of the property is also important. Now, I like to have properties that have at least a 5% gross yield. And the reason why, it just makes holding the property just a little bit easier in the long run. Now, this is obviously personal preference. If you can afford to hold a property with a 3% yield, and get much more growth, more power to you, you can absolutely do that. But I like to make it conservative. I like to make it nice and balanced. We've got a balanced growth and yielding asset here. So it must meet some of those criteria. The most important thing is the growth. Okay, so let me run you through the numbers, because the numbers, understanding the numbers behind your investment is the most important thing. After all, you are investing money. It is an investment that is going to better your position down the line. This is not how the property looks. It doesn't matter as long as these numbers number at the end of the day. All right, so we are starting with a 20% cash deposit for this particular property. All right, so we purchased it for $460. A 20% deposit is going to be $92,000 that we're going to need. Plus, there is also closing costs for buying the property. So in this scenario, closing costs are incorporating stamp duty, legal fees, your due diligence, so your building and pest, etc. And in this scenario, it's $16,500. So for a total cash input of just shy of $109,000. That's a cash deposit, very important. Interest rate, through this whole assumption, we've assumed interest rates staying at 6.5%. Okay, now if interest rates go up, all that will do here is increase your holding costs and increase the timeline taken to get to your $100,000 passive. However, if interest rates come back down, this scenario works better in your favor in the sense of decreasing your holding costs and decreasing the time taken to get to $100,000 passive. Very important. So 6.5% interest, it's going to cost us $460 a week because we are smart investors and we're going with an interest only repayment as opposed to principal and interest. The holding costs of this particular property are inclusive of your property manager to manage the property for you, your council rates, your water rates, and your insurance to cover the building, and also landlord insurance to cover any tenant defaults, etc., for a total cost of $598 per week. We have rent on this particular property, which is again a real world example, of $570 a week. Now, over the course of a year, the net cash flow position of this property is going to be negative $1,456. So just shy of $1,500 a week, a year, this property is going to cost you. $1,500 a year, which is equivalent to around $30 a week. You know, a couple of cups of coffee every week, you know, a lunch here and there to hold a growth asset. Now, if you just stopped here and you just held this property, you didn't do anything, you didn't follow through with any of this, in 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to be in a phenomenal position for a couple of reasons. Number one, the equity that you're going to build up in that time is going to be phenomenal. If that's growing at 6% per annum on average, year on year over a 20-year period, you do the maths, you're going to have some pretty decent equity here, even if you didn't touch any of the debt, all right? Number one. Number two, the longer you hold these properties, the better they are going to cash flow. So whilst this is a negative cash flow position today, that doesn't mean this is going to be a negative cash flow position in 5 or 10 years. Why? A couple of reasons. Number one, inflation is going to increase your holding costs. That's not a great thing, but that's just what happens. Also, inflation is going to push up rents. But interestingly, with real estate, the rent increase seems to always outpace inflation. Why do I know this? Because I've seen this in my own portfolio and for clients over the years that I have been involved in property, okay? So what is a negative cash flow position today is not a negative cash flow position in the future, all right? So we're in year one. We have gone and bought ourselves a house on a big block of land with these criteria that I mentioned, all right? So let's move into year two, okay? Now, in this example, we are talking about building a high quality granny flat. But before I move any further, and before any of you go, oh, granny flats, I don't want to do that. All this is a high yielding asset, okay? You can replace this granny flat with another property as long as the yield is a positive yield for you at the end of the day. That's why we are balancing out our portfolio with a growth asset and a high yielding asset. The granny flats are good because you've already got the property, okay? You can add this granny flat to your existing property, okay? But again, if you don't want to go through the build process of a granny flat, you can replace this step with a high yielding asset. I have done this in my portfolio journey and it still works pretty much the exact same way, all right? So in this example, we're talking about building a high quality granny flat. Now, before I go into the numbers, you might be sitting there going, well, Nick, I can get a granny flat prefab for, under 100 grand. That you can, my friend, but I am talking about high quality granny flats that are desirable for tenants to want to live in. This is a 2-bedroom granny flat, high quality finishes, it's fully self-contained. So it is basically like living in a little 2-bedroom unit. You have no idea that it's attached to this house in any way, shape or form. And the reason I want to do this is, well, firstly, because I want to be a good landlord. I want tenants to want to live in my properties. And I want to have an attractive product where people are happy to pay good rent to live in this building. After all, we are after a very high yield by doing this particular process, all right? So I'm fully aware that you can get them much cheaper, but this strategy we're going through, we're building out a high quality, long-term sustainable strategy. And coming back to those with a low risk appetite and proven strategies, this is, I guess, the pillar of why we're doing this. So high quality granny flat, again, you've got to factor in build time. Granny flats are not just built like that. It takes time. There are also upfront costs that you will need to front up to get this granny flat build started. For example, there's going to be site preparation, there's going to be approvals, there's going to be connection to utilities and so on to get this thing going. I've factored in about a $37,000 upfront cost, okay? But we are not using our own cash to do this. We are using equity from our first investment property to fund the build of the granny flat. Now, why would we want to do this? Well, firstly, why would we want to use our own cash? I certainly don't want to do that. I want to use the growth of the property to fund the purchase of the second property or the build of the second property, okay? Now, when we move down into the numbers here, the interest rate, again, 6.5%. Interest only, right, on this entire build. So we're building it for $170, plus you're using equity of $37,000 to get this thing going, is going to cost you $259 a week. Again, that's factoring in the equity that we've pulled out of our first property. Equity equals debt, and we have to pay it back somehow. Holding costs of $130,000 for a total weekly cost of $389 once this thing is built. And going off the rent that we can likely get for a product like this, would likely be around $450 per week. All right, not bad. Okay, so at the moment, we're in year 2. We've got one property that is a freestanding house. We've now got a fully self-contained granny flat. Now our net cash flow position, factoring in property 1 and granny flat 1, is no longer negative $1,400 a year. It's now positive almost $3,000 a year. Okay. This is also factoring in the equity release and the debt we've got to pay back on it, plus the debt from here, all the expenses to hold the property. We are now in a positive cash flow position of $3,000 a year. All right, we're only 2 years in. We obviously have a long way to go to get to 100 grand, but things are looking pretty good for us. All right. We then transition into year number 3. Okay, now year number 3, we're essentially going to replicate what we did in year 1. But for the sake of this example and being realistic, we're not going to buy the same property at the same price, right? The market's moved a little bit. So I've factored in, we're now buying a similar style property for $480,000. Okay, but the same principle applies. We want to buy it for $480,000, but we want it to be worth around $500,000 or more. Okay, for the exact same reasons as we just done here. Now, this property, we're putting only down a 10% deposit, all right? We're not going to pull out 20% equity from here. We're only taking 10%. In this example, is $48,000. Closing costs, $17,000. That's factoring in your stamp duty, your due diligence and legal fees, etc. For a total equity release of $65,000. Now, as we move into the detail, interest rate 6.5%. Interest only $681 per week. Holding costs, again, property manager, insurance, rates, etc. $140 per week. Total costs $821 a week. The rent though is only going to be $600 per week. So it is going to put us back into the negative cash flow territory. So this cash flow position is our net cash flow position for all of the properties we now own, including this second house that we have. And we're now sitting at $6,208 per year out of pocket, okay? Now, this is where we come back to sacrificing a little bit in the now for much more later on, which you are about to see. So it is going to cost you out of pocket, but we need to think of the bigger picture here and remembering the negative cash flow position today is not the negative cash flow position in the future, okay? Year 3, 2 properties, 1 granny flat. We transitioned into year 4, all right? Now the granny flats become more expensive, okay? Inflation's eaten away at some of the construction costs. So it's now, instead of 170 grand, it's now 180, all right? We've now got a $48,000 upfront cost to go and build this thing. But again, we're using equity because we've bought our properties below market value. We've got some usable equity in there. We've got enough income to service the debt on the equity releases, plus all the loan repayments that we have, okay? Interest only, including the equity release, $285 per week, holding costs of $130 for a total cost of $415, all right? Rent is $450 a week, okay? Our net cash flow position, factoring in property 1, granny flat 1, property 2, and now granny flat 2, is still a negative position, but it's gone down to $621 per annum, okay? So we went from $6,200 per annum here in year 3, and we've reduced it down to $621. As I said, the numbers in the background here are factoring the rent increasing year on year from property 1, the rent increasing year on year from granny flat 1, the rent increasing from buying this second house on the big block of land. That's how we get to this position now of having, it's still negative, but it's not as bad, all right? Keep in mind that the numbers behind this simulation is also factoring the inflation, your costs inflating as well. So this is not just an airy-fairy, happy number. This is the real deal of what you can expect with inflation being at 3%. On average year on year, all right? So $621 per annum out of pocket. Not a bad place to be when you've now got technically 4 properties, all right? Pretty damn good, okay? Moving into year 5. It's rinsing and repeating. We're going and buying our third freestanding house. Again, property prices have increased, right? Instead of buying for $460 like we did a couple of years ago, we have to buy it now for $520,000. But again, we're putting down a 10% deposit here, $52,000. Closing costs just shy of 20 grand for a total equity input of $71,000. Now you might be sitting there going, well, yeah, right. How can you just keep pulling out equity all the time? Like, surely there's going to be a limit. You are absolutely right. There will be a limit for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're able to do this because we're buying in growth areas, right? 6% per annum. We're buying at the right price. So we're buying an undervalued property. So we are allowing us to have more equity much quicker. All right. And then number three, we have the income to support the equity releases as we go through. And number four, the rental income combined from the portfolio up to this point in time is allowing us to have serviceability with the banks. Okay, so that's how you would want to do it. Okay, now if you had cash savings to input here, you would be in a much better position because you are having a cash input rather than debt funding the deposit for the property purchase, which is a great place to be if you can afford to do it. But again, I'm going low risk appetite. You don't want to input too much. Portfolio is just snowballing from here. All right. So the interest only on this starts to tick up. This is where it gets a little bit hectic because the interest only repayment is $739 per week, including the mortgage on this property plus the equity used as the deposit to buy it. Holding costs $150 a week, total cost $824 per week. And the rent that you could expect on a property like this is only $650. So you do have a shortfall here. Now, the cumulative net cash flow position from all the properties we have up to year 5 is now going to cost us $8,101 per annum out of pocket. Okay. Remembering this number is a pre-tax position. So if this is bought in your personal name, all right, I'm not your accountant. This is not financial advice or tax advice, but there is a potential for you to negatively gear this position to reduce your taxable income if it's in your personal name. If you've bought in a company or a trust, speak to your accountant about how that might work. Okay. So again, coming back to sacrificing a little bit in the now to have a lot more later on. All right. We're 5 years in. We've now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 technical properties. All right, it is costing us a little bit, but if this is, you and your partner, it becomes much more manageable. Or if you're just a baller that can afford it, more power to you. All right. So year 5, this is where we are. Year 6, guess what we're going to do? We're going to go and build another granny flat, or let me remind you, another high yielding asset. If you don't want to build a granny flat, again, granny flats got more expensive since we last built one. It's now $190,000 to build the thing. And I sort of ran out of space here, but the numbers are essentially calculated in the exact same way. However, because the rents have started to go up year on year for all of these properties, and we've just built another high yielding asset, instead of it costing us $8 grand a year, we're now making $7,245 a year positive cash flow. Okay. This is why you want to have high yielding assets to balance the growth of your portfolio and to balance the holding cost as well. Okay. Year 6, that's our position. Year 7 is when we go and buy the 4th freestanding house or the 4th high growth asset. This time it's now increased in value to $550,000, 10% deposit, $55K, $20K holding costs, 75 grand in equity. Now this equity is probably going to come from a couple of your properties, depending on how you've structured your portfolio and how you've structured the debt. Or if you're lucky enough, it might be able to come from one property, but it is very realistic for you to take a bit of equity out of this one, bit of equity out of this one, bit of equity out of this one to fund the purchase of this one here. Interest only is going to cost you $781. That's not $781K, it's $781 per week. Now the cash flow position here does decrease because you bought an asset that doesn't cash flow so well from day one, but we're still in a positive position here. It's just costing us, it's making us, just north of $2,700 per annum. All right. So let's just pause here for a second. We've now got 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, all right, and 3 granny flats. And it's making us $2,700 a year after we've used equity to fund the entire purchase except for the first property. All right, pretty damn good place to be. Now, again, if you are using cash deposits for these, your cash flow position is going to be exponentially greater than what this number here is showing us. Okay, year 8, granny flat or high yielding asset, $200,000 because the price has gone up over the years. But look at this cash flow position now after the build of this granny flat is complete, or after the purchase of your high yielding asset is complete. We are now cash flowing $21,000 a year in a positive way. Nice place to be, all right? That's 8 years into our property investing journey. This is why I said this takes time, okay? Now, there are ways in which you can speed this up, and I'll get to that in a second, but I want to show you what we're all waiting for in that year 14, okay? If we've done all of this the right way, by year number 14, our net cash flow position, so after all expenses and debt repayments, we are going to be ahead $105,000. Nice place to be, okay? Our net worth position, so total asset value of all of these properties minus the debt for all of these properties, we're going to have a net worth position of $1.7 million. Now, not bad, if I say so myself, because just ask yourself, in 14 years, can you save $1.7 million? The answer is most people can't, all right? Unless you've got a very high performing business, or you win the lotto, or you get inheritance. Most people aren't getting this position in their lifetime, let alone 14 years, okay? So you might be asking yourself, cool mate, great story, but how can I speed this up? I don't want to wait 14 years. A couple of ways you can do that. Like I mentioned, if you are very good at saving and you don't use equity, this timeline will decrease dramatically because you're not leveraged all the way up to your eyeballs, but you're using your cash savings to accelerate that journey so that cash flow comes in a lot sooner. That's probably number one. Number two, you can manufacture growth and value out of the houses that you buy. For example, you could buy this property for $460,000 if you know what you're doing and you know how to spot an undervalued property and what to do with it. For example, renovating the property with light cosmetic renos, you can accelerate the growth of the property, which means you can accelerate the rate at which you buy. So instead of buying one every year, maybe you can buy a couple in 1 year, build a couple of granny flats, for example. Again, that will speed up this process dramatically. There are other things you can do also to increase the cash flow of the properties, okay? So a light cosmetic reno might increase the value, but it also could increase the rent that you receive, all right? Increasing the rent is going to increase the cash flow, and it's going to decrease this timeline significantly. Like I mentioned, instead of buying or building a high quality granny flat, you might want to do the prefab thing, and it could cost you a lot less. If you understand the market in which you are doing that in, and if you know that people are going to want to live there, maybe do the prefab route. You can decrease your cost here and decrease your timeline in the back end as well. So there's a load of different ways in which you can actually speed up this journey. But I wanted to have a realistic way for someone to passively use this strategy to essentially build wealth and cash flow in the background, right? Like I said, this is for a busy professional. This is for, a busy business owner, someone who just doesn't really want to get involved too heavily with property and be too active. This is a great passive way to be able to make $100,000 in passive income. So you can now take this strategy and you can implement this out there yourself. I've just given you step-by-step what you need to do, the types of properties you need to look at. This is absolute gold in my view. So if you've just looked at all that and you're thinking, yeah, cool, Nick, but I'm going to need some help with that. This is where my team comes in. This is where I come in. We do this literally every single day for clients, mapping out their specific circumstance because everyone has a unique scenario. So if you're in that category and you're looking for someone to help you on your property investing journey and actually turn this into reality for you, reach out to my team. This is what we do every single day. If you're watching this, there's a button down below. You can click to book a free strategy session directly with my team. We can talk you through this in your specific circumstance. Or if you want to give us a call, 0452 046 274, that'll take you directly through to my team and we can book in a strategy session just for you. So that is 100K passive income blueprint strategy for you. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, I'll catch you soon.